Welcome to the Starzology Astrology Podcast. I'm your host, Alison Price, and I'm here with my co-host, Arwynne O'Neill.
Hi, Alison. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you once more. Now, in this episode, we're going to be talking about one of the major aspect patterns, and we're going to be talking about the Star of David.
Yes.
This is a pattern made up of some Ptolemaic aspects. It doesn't happen often, and the one that we're talking about in November is not exactly a full star, but it's close enough. It's the closest we're going to get for many, many years. So that's why I thought we'd have a discussion about it today.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you say not often, you mean...
not often, yeah.
Yeah, the last one was 1890.
Something or other, yeah.
Yeah.
Way, way back. So we're using, okay, let me tell about my orbs, because some people say, oh, yeah, we got it.
Right.
So when I'm working with major aspect patterns, the trines, where there's two aspects in it, there's trines, and my orb there is 8 degrees, and then the sextiles, and my orb there is 4 degrees. I don't take aspects to the points such as the ascendant, midheaven, or nodes or so, and to create this pattern. Mm. We are only looking for the pattern to be attaching to the planets, because they have the energies in a chart. So yes, we can argue orbs back and forth, and yes, we can argue what items are going to be put in it, but there are the defaults we're working with today.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the chart I'm actually looking for is for November the 3rd, 2023. And what we have is 2 grand trines. There's one there between Mercury, the Moon, and Neptune. That is in water. And then the second grand trine is with Uranus, Pluto, and Venus, and that is in Earth. So what we have here is 2 grand trines, and they're both in the passive signs.
Yeah.
And then additionally on the top of these 2 grand trines, we have 4 sextiles. So Pluto is sextile Neptune, which, let's face it, it very often is.
Yeah.
Then we also have Neptune is sextile to Uranus in Taurus, and Uranus is sextile to the Moon in Cancer, which is very strongly placed there in its sign of rulership. And then the Moon is additionally sextile to Venus in Virgo. So we have 4 of the sextiles in, but to have a correct cross of David, you need to have the 6 sextiles. So the 2 that are missing is the one between Venus and Mercury, and the one between Mercury and Pluto.
Yeah.
But it's pretty close. That's why I thought we'd have a chat about it.
Absolutely. It's the closest we're going to see in our lifetimes.
Yeah, probably. So if you've got a baby born on November the 3rd, it's going to have this pattern in its birth chart, which is fabulous.
Yeah.
And astrologers will be interested for the rest of their lives when they do this chart.
Absolutely.
And again, if your birthday happens to be on November the 3rd or the 2nd or the 4th, you will have this pattern. Well, it's not going to be part of your solar return because it hasn't got the sun in it. So although it will be built into your solar return, it's not really going to trigger because the sun's not one of the planets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unless, of course, your sun is at one of these points.
Yeah.
And then it'll be a little bit of extra boost.
There is that as well.
Yeah.
There is that, yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's in the water signs and the earth signs, so it's a totally passive Star of David, almost.
Passive / feminine / negative, whatever you want to call it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this is quite an interesting pattern, a major aspect pattern with Ptolemaic aspects that you don't see often. That's why we're having a look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. So a bit about the history.
Yeah.
And here I'm going to be quoting liberally from an article by Pat Giesler. And this is a fantastic article. We're going to link to it below in the show notes.
Yeah.
For anyone who's listening and doesn't want to check the show notes, it's at alab.com/text/GieslerAspects.html. So, and this is really interesting. It goes into a bit of the history and then a bit about what it looks like when it's in someone's chart. Of course, since, as we were saying, the last time this actually occurred was in the 1890s, we're probably not going to know anyone who has this in their chart. Unless, But so here we go. The Star of David, still used as a sacred symbol by Jews worldwide, is based on the horoscope of King David, who is said to have been born with 2 fortunate grand trines, which interlocked to create a 6-pointed star. To intimidate his enemies and imply that he was unbeatable, he engraved it on his armor. And as they say, it must have worked because he seems to have won all of his fights and became a powerful monarch. So that's the history. In modern times, we still see the grand trine as a favorable pattern in the horoscope because it links all the qualities of a particular quadruplicity. And this means all the earth signs or all the fire signs or all the water signs or what have you in 120-degree relationships. And that provides an individual with talents in these particular areas. So someone who is, super fiery, super watery, whatever. We also realize, as this Pat Giesler's article goes on to say, we realize that while the grand trine implies a talent, it is a lazy aspect, and that's, I'm putting this in air quotes, because the individual with such pattern may not do a great deal with it. And it needs to have an impetus of like a square or an opposition to kind of boost that into actual activity, or else they might just live their whole life and not actually make use of that talent. So it goes on to say in this article that most charts with grand trines do actually have one or more of the key positions activated by a square or an opposition. And those hard aspects are what spurs the grand trine to really come into its own. And then you can actually use this talent. But yeah, the 60-degree sextile, which is the sort of what makes the star of the Star of David. That's what really kind of makes this a really extra special pattern, and not just like a grand trine or two.
Just plonked there.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like 2 grand trines plus a bunch of sextiles, lots of like flowing,
easy,
charmed life kind of thing.
Yeah, a charmed life. Yeah. It's anyone with a grand trine has got. From the outside looking in, they've got an ezy life.
From the outside looking in, yeah, but it doesn't always work out that way.
That's right.
Because it is the hardships that make, character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's true. There's someone in my family who has a grand trine in fire, and honestly, they just sit there and people give them things. And I'm thinking, what? Beach house and vacations and what are you doing? I'm working on my talent. And life is easy for people with these softer aspects.
And they don't always recognize it. These are not the happiest people we know. No, I mean, not usually. Yeah, it's interesting. Just looking at the charts of my friends and family as you do, and you kind of think, oh, wow, this person's had a really, challenging life, and they've done a lot, and they've been through a lot, and you'd expect to see, some crazy. And then it's not always reflected like that. It's and sometimes you see like grand crosses and like a lot of difficult aspects, and you're like, well, this is one of the nicest people I know. Like, how did that happen? Mm-hmm. And it's because it builds character.
Challenges build you, and exactly. To just be sitting around on your lestring on your grand trines and sextiles like you're in a hammock, basically, on one of those lazy rivers, and the pina colada comes floating by, and all you have to do is reach out, and sometimes I can't even reach out for that. This is how I always envisage these people, because I don't have any of these soft patterns like that. Yeah. Now, that's interesting, the article that you just said. I don't suppose you gave a birthday for King David, did she, while she was at it? Probably not.
No.
Because you're talking about King David in the Bible, right?
I mean, I assume so.
Yeah, this is it. So this is where this pattern comes from. And because it's such a powerful pattern, the equilateral triangle with the 3 points, the 3 planes, it's the first pattern that creates a plane over just the line. It's symbolic. Oh. And this is where symbols really come in that make a difference. And the fact that this symbol for this whole religion is easygoing, and they benefit. They are, well, they call it the chosen race, right? And
yet, if you look at the history,
well, I know,
right?
But the symbology is built in, whereas Christianity has an entirely different challenge in its symbology.
Ross, that's fascinating. Oh my God. I mean, literally.
Yes, wow. Literally. This is the thing.
That's fascinating.
So we may sit around and think, well, a lot of these people do prevail, and they do. And this is the symbology we're talking about today, that if you were born on November the 3rd this year, or you have even a closeness to this, you benefit from life. People, the sextiles is where your latent talents are, that you're just sitting on all these skills and that, and not necessarily tapping into them unless you've got a hard square or opposition coming off one of these planets.
Right.
And of course the trines just make life easy, so that's nice.
Yeah.
And ideally you want a chart that's balanced with hard and soft aspects, and actually there are some hard aspects within this chart for November the 3rd. The Sun and Mars is all opposition to Uranus and Jupiter. But what we're talking about today is actually the pattern. We're trying to pull out the pattern and say, you don't see it often.
Yeah.
And I don't think we've spoken about major aspect patterns yet, but we'll get round to them all eventually.
Yeah.
And this was one that just cropped up in November. So that's why I thought it would be a good one to have a bit of a chat about.
Totally.
Do you have people in your life who've even got a grand trine? I mean, that's the first step.
Yeah, I do actually. And it's interesting because, like, as you say, it's got to have something else in it to really boost it. And my partner actually has a couple of grand trines.
Really?
Which are, and it's interesting because they're in the houses of like now I don't have a chart in front of me, so I'm gonna mess this up, of course. But I remember when I was looking at it before, and it really was all about family. It was all about his adopted, and his adoptive family was just amazing. And it was, the best thing that could have happened to him.
Fabulous childhood.
Given the biological family's, sort of not great history and, whatever. But yeah, the adoptive family was amazing and just full of love, full of support, and couldn't have been a better environment. And when I saw those grand trines, it was just, for me, it was like, oh my God, that's the parents. That's the adoptive parents.
Yes.
So, yeah. And that's a foundation, right?
That's right.
Like, you need soft aspects and hard aspects. And of course, he's got plenty of that as well, to spur activity and ambition,
challenge
and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But there's a really great, foundation of like, a really kind of charmed childhood where, it really supported like him becoming who he should be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I do think he's an optimistic person as well. He's always he's always very upbeat. And I look at you as a couple, and he's done well to pick you and all the rest of it. Many people in their charts, such as myself, I've just got a T-square. It's a tough one. I've got to keep working at it. Yeah. There's no, there's the odd trine, but it's really not, I'm not leaning into it.
Yeah.
Whereas those people who do have a grand trine, just one grand trine, their life becomes elevated to a level where it's easier than the rest of us. A lot of people do struggle, and this is where these different aspects come in.
It's funny, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, and I can say this because, whatever. You don't know these people, our listeners, but his sister, my partner's sister, used to call him the golden child. And when they would get into fights, it was all about everything's been handed to you. Your life has been so easy.
Yes.
Even though they were raised by the same set of wonderful adoptive parents, she felt like he had everything handed to him, and that was just, he was the favored and blah, blah, blah. And he was like, just mystified by her ire.
But it's true, because this is how people actually perceive them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That everything was easy for him and it was not for her.
Yeah. I mean, one of my 4 kids has this grand trine, and honestly, it's just, they're cruising through, and I'm thinking, you've got to do your homework.
Yeah.
And they're still kind of getting through.
Yeah.
People are giving them a leg up all the time.
Yeah. But you can't rely on that, because certain things will be handed to you and then other things, not at all.
Yeah, but you might be handed a car or something like that. But
it's funny, because you see people with these aspects, and then it's like, well, yeah, maybe they had a great family life, but then they can't hold a job, or they can't seem to find a relationship, or, something like that. Like, it makes certain things easy, but then you get tricked into thinking that everything's going to be easy. And then it's like, oh no, you get slapped down by, life and adulthood.
Yeah. So you do have that. This particular one, as I say, on November the 3rd, does have these oppositions as well. And there's an opposition between Pluto and the moon as well. So there is quite a lot of challenges there. Mm-hmm. I don't actually see any squares. So it's going to be external dilemmas that's going to come through. But in general, it is overwhelmingly soft aspects, an easy life. Things just come their way. They're in the right place at the right time. Mm-hmm. They know someone who knows someone, and life becomes easy. And for the rest of us just looking on who don't have a birthday on that day or are not going to be born on that day, it's going to be a good day. It's probably going to be a good week, because these patterns are going to be there for a while of ease and things. So if there is something that you want to try and do and you want to do it on an easy time, that would be the week to do it, the week around November the 3rd.
Yeah,
when these transits are well positioned.
Yeah.
And of course, you would then want to see, well, how are these planets lying on your chart?
Yeah.
But in general, this is going to be a pretty easygoing day, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great way of looking at it.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm going to read a bit more from this article, because it does actually talk about not just having a Star of David, but what it's like to have many sextiles or grand trines in your chart. So it says here that many sextiles, such as the Star of David, draw an individual into exploring a wide array of interests, some of which will be developed and become full-fledged talents, perhaps. But in any case, the individual is more interested in the world and more often more interesting to others than would otherwise be the case. As the planets move along through the zodiac, they create many patterns, blah, blah, blah. And then they go on to describe, just as a contrast to the Star of David, what we call, kind of the most difficult, which is like the Grand Cross. And they talk about an example of what it's like to have a Grand Cross. It says they're not much fun for the owner of a Grand Cross. And life goes on swimmingly And then when things get bad in one area, all hell breaks loose in another and then another. Nothing ever just happens and is one problem. It's always suddenly everything is a chain reaction, a domino effect of catastrophes. And they give this example of you back your car into a spot in the parking lot, and then suddenly you hit the car behind you, and you apologize profusely, and the owner says no problem, and then you walk away. That's a normal thing. But if you have a Grand Cross, you do the same thing, and it turns out the car was like an antique. It's worth $300,000. The owner was like under contract to bring it to a show tomorrow, and if he doesn't show up, he has to pay a fine. And not only now do you have to pay to fix the damage, but you have to help pay the fine. And then it turns out that the owner of the car who was like commissioning the guy is like a mafia guy, and now it's like this whole thing. And so that's the Grand Cross as compared with the Star of David.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's interesting what you were saying just there about how the sextiles offer you talents that you either tap into and you may grow with them, and they are there. And it's because this pattern has 6 planets in it.
Yeah.
So as the sun transits during the year, it's triggering every 2 months. It's triggering this whole pattern. Yeah. So you are continuously being gifted the goodness of and all the planets trigger it. So it's a huge thing.
We've been talking about how like it's too easy, blah, blah, blah. And, you might just kind of like let it pass you by. But what I like about what they just said in this article is the wide array of interests that may become full-fledged talents. They may not. But we all know people who are just, not super ambitious, but they're super interesting. Like maybe this is a great person to have on your team in pub trivia because they seem to know a little bit about everything, right?
Yeah. Like, because it's the splash into the chart too.
Yeah,
they're a generalist, not a specialist.
Yeah, and a generalist is a wonderful thing to be. And in fact, I've got this. Yeah, I don't have it at my hand, but there's this wonderful quote by Robert Heinlein about like specialization is for insects.
Oh,
and how you should try to be a little good at everything.
A little, jack of all trades. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to wrap it up, we've been talking about the Star of David that's coming up in early November. It's not a full-blown star, but it's close enough that we're going to talk about it because it's an interesting thing to crop up. And it's really the first time we've spoken about major aspect patterns, and I think we're going to be talking about T-squares and Grand Crosses in more detail a little bit later on.
Absolutely.
And we'll be getting around to the other ones, the yods and what have you as well going forward. So I think this has been great. It's been a great little introduction to looking out for these patterns and paying attention if you're an astrologer or even interested slightly.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, well, Arwynne, thank you so much for coming along again and sharing your insights with us.
Thanks for inviting me. It's been great.
It's been great. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Thanks so much for getting this far through the episode. I just want to take a moment to tell you about the 2 main options of my astrology services. So the first one is coaching. If you are an aspiring astrologer, and by that I mean someone who's perhaps a hobbyist astrologer or someone who's learning astrology or a student, or you've got a few books and you've been doing it for a while, but perhaps you need a little bit of help to bring it all together, then maybe getting some astrological coaching from me would be the answer for you. The astrology coaching I offer is a 1-hour session on Zoom, and it's tailored to answer your particular questions. For example, if you have issues with natal chart readings, we can go there. Or if you're having problems working with your forecasting, we can go there. Or even basic astrology stuff, or even getting yourself organized for your astrology business. The idea is that astrological coaching will answer your particular questions. It's tailored specifically to you and where you are in your astrological journey. And I'm happy to help you out with some guidance about how you can get going, what to focus on, and what to dismiss. So that would be the astrological coaching for people trying to learn astrology. The second astrological service I offer is consultations. So this is for someone who perhaps doesn't know anything about astrology, but they just want to have their chart read or get their chart done. Call it what you will. So once more, this is a 1-hour consultation over Zoom. I will interpret your chart, tell you about the main features, tell you about where the energy is flowing, and all the rest of what is entailed in a thorough natal chart interpretation. I can also add in some forecasting in there too, bearing in mind we only have 1 hour. So just in summary, I've got coaching for people who want to learn astrology, and I've got consultations for those who want to get an astrology reading done. I'm Alison Price from Starzology.com. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.